Hello there, and welcome to Origins of Earth, where curiosity gets cozy and science takes the scenic route to slumber. Tonight's quiet journey drifts over a sea of golden dunes, across horizons that ripple like waves frozen in time. We're going to a place that many imagine as lifeless, endless, and empty.
But beneath its silence may lie the oldest whispers of civilization itself. The Sahara Desert. A landscape that seems timeless, but might be keeping time's earlier secrets.
Before we wander too far into the sand, tell me something. Where are you listening from tonight?
Is it quiet where you are? Maybe the air is cool. Or maybe it carries the hum of late traffic, or the soft rustle of curtains. Wherever you are, I'd like you to imagine the desert for a moment.
Not as a harsh place, but as one vast, sleeping body, breathing slowly under the stars. Now settle in and let's begin. Because somewhere beneath the dunes, long before pyramids and pharaohs, before history learned to write, there might have been people who called this ocean of sand their home.
The Sahara today stretches over 9 million kilometers, covering nearly all of North Africa. From the Atlantic to the Red Sea, it's the largest hot desert on Earth. A continent within a continent. Seen from above, it looks almost alien. Mountain ranges drowned in dunes.
Dry riverbeds, twisting like veins across a body that once pulsed with water.
But here's the strange thing. For most of human history, it wasn't like this. The Sahara we know, the endless sun-baked expanse, might just be a passing phase. Brief, dry chapter in a much longer, wetter story. If we could roll back time, not just centuries, but tens of thousands of years, green plains dotted with lakes and rivers, home to giraffes, hippos, elephants, and early humans. It was alive, fertile, and thriving. Scientists call these intervals the African humid periods, times when the region's climate shifted dramatically, turning desert to grassland.
The most recent one ended about 5,000 years ago, right around when ancient Egypt began to rise.
Coincidence, perhaps, or maybe not. The rhythm of the Sahara's transformations follows a cosmic pattern.
Every 20,000 years or so, Earth's tilt and orbit change slightly, altering how sunlight warms the continents.
When the northern hemisphere get a bit more summer heat, the monsoon rains move northward.
The Sahara blooms. When the cycle swings back, the rains retreat, and the green gives way to gold again.
The breath of the planet has been repeating for millions of years. Lush, dry, lush, dry. Painting and erasing civilizations that might never have made it into recorded history. Satellites have detected ancient river systems buried beneath the dunes.
Their courses still visible from space. There are traces of lake beds so vast they could have rivaled modern seas. Some researchers believe that within those lost basins, entire networks of human settlements might be entombed,
waiting for rediscovery. It's as if the desert is holding its breath,
keeping secrets until the right moment. For centuries, travelers and scientists alike have speculated that before Egypt, before Mesopotamia, maybe even before the Indus Valley, there existed a civilization here.
It was washed away, not by water, but by the absence of it.
They point to ancient rock art, stone circles, and forgotten tools scattered across regions that now seem utterly uninhabitable. Each one suggests that people not only lived here, they thrived. Imagine standing in what's now the Central Sahara, near the Tassili Niger Plateau in southern Algeria. And on the walls around you are paintings, thousands of them, herds of cattle, people that hasn't seen rain in millennia. They speak of rivers, of grasslands, of communities
that once organized their days around water and migration. It's hard not to wonder who they were. Were they nomads who simply followed the green as the rains shifted? Or something more permanent, a settled people who built, traded, and shaped a culture
that left faint traces for the wind to bury? Some evidence points toward the latter. Across Niger, Chad, Libya, and Egypt, archaeologists have uncovered pottery shards, stone tools, even remnants of dwellings. Not primitive campsites, but signs of coordinated living, storage pits, hearths, and organized layouts that suggest planning.
In the far southwest of Egypt lies Nabta Playa, one of the most intriguing places in the Sahara. To the untrained eye, it's just a dry lake bed scattered with stones. But in the late 20th century, archaeologists found that those stones weren't random.
They'd been arranged, some in alignments that matched the solstices, others forming circles that might predate Stonehenge by 1,000 years. The site was active around 7,000 years ago, during a time when the Sahara was still green. People gathered there seasonally, probably to celebrate the rains and the cycles of the stars.
It's here that the story of the Sahara begins to sound less like prehistory
and more like a forgotten prologue to civilization itself. These weren't isolated foragers.
They were astronomers, herders, engineers of ritual and memory. When the desert began to dry again, they may have moved east, following the Nile,
bringing their knowledge of water, crops, and celestial timing with them. Some researchers even speculate that the rise of the Egyptian civilization was seeded by migrations out of the Sahara, as it turned arid. The idea isn't proven, but it's compelling.
That the Sahara, far from being the cradle of emptiness, might have been the cradle before the cradle. Satellite imagery continues to add pieces to this puzzle. High-resolution scans reveal patterns under the sand that resemble river deltas and floodplains. Some show concentric shapes that could be geological jams,
or perhaps the remains of ancient settlements. One region in Mauritania, the Rishat structure, often called the Eye of the Sahara, has inspired endless debate. It's a massive circular formation visible from space, made of concentric rings of rock. Geologists say it's a natural dome eroded over time, but its symmetry, size, and the presence of ancient artifacts
In nearby areas have sparked speculation that it might have once been a hub of early human activity. Some even connected, rather imaginatively, to the legend of Atlantis. The science doesn't support that link, but the fascination tells us something. The desert invites wonder, partly because it hides more than it reveals.
The terrain shifts constantly. Dunes move like tides, and temperatures swing between extremes.
What the landscape once looked like. Layers of fossilized pollen and sediment cores from ancient lakes show unmistakable evidence of grasses, trees, and water-loving species. It wasn't just habitable, it was abundant. That abundance changed the course of human evolution. Early Homo sapiens, and even older hominins before them, used these green corridors as migration routes.
Genetic studies suggest that during the wet periods, populations mixed across vast distances, spreading technologies, languages, and ideas. When the desert returned, those groups became isolated again, preserving fragments of their once shared cultures. It's like a heartbeat in slow motion. Connection, separation, connection, separation, over tens of thousands of years.
If you look at the Sahara today, it can feel impossible to imagine life thriving there. Petrified wood, and even the footprints of ancient animals that once crossed muddy plains.
It's as if the desert occasionally exhales, revealing what it's been holding on to.
And perhaps the most haunting part of all is this: the Sahara might not always stay dry. The same orbital cycles that turned it green before will one day do so again.
It may take thousands of years, but eventually rains will return. Rivers will carve through dunes once more. We may witness the desert's rebirth, a second chance for a landscape that has seen civilizations come and go, like waves against its timeless shore. Until then, it keeps its secrets. The lost rivers still trace their paths under the sand. The rock paintings still wait in the shade of forgotten cliffs. The stories of people who lived and dreamed there remain half buried, half whispered by the wind. The desert remembers, and as we drift deeper into its memory, the next part of our journey will take us further back, to a time when the Sahara was not a desert at all, but a garden of life. A place where Earth itself seemed younger, where rivers flowed, where now only sand moves, and where the first signs of human imagination began to take root beneath a sky full of rain.
When we imagine the Sahara, we often see heat rising from the sand in shimmering waves. An endless stretch of dunes under a sky so bright it feels almost metallic.
But long before it was a desert, before the sun baked its surface into silence, the Sahara was green.
Not just a patch or two of grass near an oasis. but an enormous, thriving ecosystem.
Stretching from the Atlantic coast to the Red Sea, a place alive with rivers, trees, and lakes, large enough to dwarf the ones we know today. To picture it properly, you have to unlearn the desert a little. Forget the dryness, the glare, the mirage. Instead, think of wide plains covered in tall grasses and scattered acacia trees. Monsoon rains that turned the ground dark and fragrant. The air would have been heavy with a smell of damp earth. And above it all, the same constellations we see now, mirrored in the reflections of lakes that have since disappeared into dust. This world, lush and restless, came and went many times.
The Sahara's greening wasn't a one-time event. It followed the slow rhythm of Earth's orbit. A cosmic metronome, keeping time with the tilt of the planet. About every 20,000 years, that tilt shifts just enough to change where the rains fall. About every 20,000 years, that tilt shifts just enough to change where the rains fall. Grasslands spread, rivers reawaken. The Sahara breathes in.
Then, as the tilt swings back, the monsoons retreat, the rains fade, and the Sahara exhales. The grass dies, the lakes dry up, and dunes crawl back over the bones of rivers. This cycle has played out over and over for millions of years. During the last Green Age,
Roughly between 14,000 and 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was at its most hospitable.
grasses, shrubs, and even trees that still thrive farther south today. It wasn't just a few patches of greenery. It was an entire landscape transformed. If you could stand there then, maybe near what's now the heart of Libya or Chad,
you'd see lakes spreading out to the horizon. Some, like the ancient Mega-Chad, were enormous,
larger than the Caspian Sea. It's hard to imagine such scale in a place now so dry. But the evidence is clear. The outlines of those vanished lakes are still visible from satellites, faint scars of shorelines that loop across the desert like ghost coastlines.
Fossilized in once wet mud, the animals that lived there tell their own story.
in what we now call an extreme environment. It's a reminder that climate is not static.
The world we know is only one version of Earth, caught between cycles of warmth, water, and wind. And where there were animals, there were people. Archaeologists have uncovered tools and artifacts scattered across the region, some tens of thousands of years old. Stone blades, scrapers, and pottery fragments speak of humans who hunted, fished, and gathered here long before the sands arrived. They lived along the shores of those vanished lakes,
moving with the seasons, building temporary camps that may have lasted generations.
Their world was full of color. Green plains, dark waters, gray storms, red sunsets.
They painted it on rock walls and carved it into memory. In Algeria's Tassili Nadjer Mountains, the rock art is so abundant, it's almost overwhelming. There are scenes of swimming figures,
People with bows and arrows, women carrying pots, and animals that couldn't survive a single day in the Sahara. They had time to observe, to depict, to remember. Their art tells us that they didn't see the Sahara as harsh or temporary. It was home. Some of those images show cattle herding, a detail that's more profound than it might seem. Domestic cattle imply a structured way of life. Herding requires planning, knowing where water will be, when the grass will grow, and how to move with the seasons. It means cooperation and shared knowledge.
Kind that forms the backbone of community. This wasn't just a scattering of hunters.
When scientists began dating the artifacts from these Green Sahara periods, they noticed something remarkable. The timing of its drying coincides closely with the rise of complex societies along the Nile.
As the desert began to lose its water, the people who once lived among its lakes and plains may have migrated toward the river that never stopped flowing. The Nile became a refuge, and perhaps also a new beginning. Those who had learned to track the rains and manage herds had brought their skills with them, laying the foundations for agriculture, settlement, and eventually civilization.
That connection between climate change and human development is one of the Sahara's great lessons.
The drying of the Sahara wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a catalyst,
One that might have shaped the course of history. Without it, Egypt as we know it might never have emerged. But even during its greenest times, the Sahara wasn't uniform. It wasn't one vast lawn of grass stretching unbroken.
Across Africa, there were regions of dense vegetation, others of open savanna, and still others that stayed semi-arid.
the rain came in bands, heavier in some years, lighter in others. Lakes expanded and shrank.
The people who thrived there understood how to read the sky, follow the animals, and find water.
Even as the season shifted, the lakes themselves were worlds within worlds. Some were shallow and temporary,
Forming only during the wettest years. Others lasted millennia. Sediment cores from these basins show layers of clay, silt, and organic matter built up over thousands of years.
Each layer is a page in the Sahara's diary, a record of when the rains came, what plants grew,
And how life pulsed through the region. Scientists can even trace tiny particles of pollen carried by the wind from distant forests, revealing how far the green reached during the wettest periods. One of the most striking findings from these cores is the presence of algae and diatoms.
Microscopic organisms that only live in fresh water. Their remains are like timestamps, confirming that lakes once covered vast stretches
Of what is now sand. Some of those lakes lasted so long that they developed their own ecosystems.
the desert, in a way, is built upon their fossils. To stand in those dry basins today is to feel the weight of transformation. The surface is cracked and pale, the horizon blurred by heat.
Yet just a few meters below,
the soil still contains traces of moisture. In some areas,
The groundwater that once fed those ancient lakes remains trapped in aquifers, is what modern oases depend on. It's a buried inheritance from the Green Sahara. Every palm grove that rises from the desert today is a faint echo of that lush past. The story of the Sahara's greening also stretches beyond Africa.
Similar cycles occurred in Arabia, in the Thar Desert of India, even in parts of Australia.
These global patterns remind us that Earth's climate is interconnected, shaped by orbital wobbles and solar rhythms.
Far beyond our control. When one desert blooms, another might fade.
When one river dries, a new one forms elsewhere. The planet is constantly balancing itself, trading water, wind, and warmth between its regions like breaths. Understanding these shifts helps scientists predict ownership. The answer is yes, at least in theory. The same orbital cycles that caused the last humid period will eventually recur over the next 10,000 years. As Earth's tilt and orbit continue to shift, the Sahara could once again transform into grassland. In fact, early signs of this change can already be observed, in small ways. Some models suggest that with enough rainfall and vegetation, the desert could flip rapidly
into a wetter state. It's a reminder that even the largest landscapes can change faster than we expect.
But the human factor complicates that natural rhythm. Greenhouse gas emissions and global warming may alter the cycles or override them entirely. If rainfall patterns shift differently because of human influence, Sahara's future could diverge from its past. It's a sobering thought that a pattern written in the sky for millions of years could be disrupted by what happens here on the ground. Still, the idea of a Green Sahara remains captivating.
It challenges the way we think about deserts, not as dead zones, but as places of transformation.
And might be again. For ancient humans, the greening of the Sahara must have felt like a miracle. Imagine being part of a lineage that had known only arid landscapes, suddenly finding rivers that flowed year after year.
We have meat for the winter!
Look, try and catch me.
They built their lives around that generosity, trusting it would last. When it began to fade, left tools behind in the layers of silt, and passed down oral traditions that spoke of times when the desert was green.
And so the light traveled across the great desert.
A hero must face the shadows.
Tales of lost paradises and vanished rivers. The desert remembers because people made it remember. Every artifact unearthed, every carving revealed, is a fragment of that memory surfacing again.
They're not just finding evidence. They're reopening a conversation that's been silent for millennia.
The next time you see an image of the Sahara from space, try to imagine it not as a sea of sand, but as a vast mosaic of green. Picture the ghost outlines of lakes, the shadows of rivers,
The footprints of elephants, and the small human campsites that once hugged the water's edge.
Beneath those dunes, somewhere might still lie the remains of villages, tools, and maybe even burial sites that predate the pyramids. The past isn't gone, it's sleeping. And as we continue tracing this ancient world, the next step in our journey leads us deeper underground, into the forgotten arteries of the Sahara, the lost rivers that once connected its heart to the sea. They are still there, silent and unseen. But their courses tell a story
that could reshape everything we think we know about where civilization began. Beneath the dunes of the Sahara, hidden under kilometers of sand, lie the ghost paths of rivers
that once crossed an entirely different world. They are not visible to the eye now.
But from space, the traces remain like faint scars across a sleeping face.
Ancient riverbeds, long, dry, meander through the subsurface layers of the desert.
Some stretching for hundreds, even thousands of kilometers. Their shapes are unmistakable.
The branching deltas, the sinuous bends, the wide flood plains that once carried water and life. If we could peel back the sand like a thin veil, we would find the arteries of a land that once pulsed with movement. In an era when climate and geography were partners in creating vast networks of flowing water.
Have discovered at least half a dozen major river systems buried beneath the sand.
Among them are the Tamanrasset River, the Kufra River, the Irhaha, and others whose course
all the way to the Atlantic or the Mediterranean. They are not myths, not guesses, but real channels preserved, like fossils in stone and dust. The Tamanrasset River is perhaps the most astonishing of them all. Its traces were first detected through radar data collected by satellites in the early 2000s.
A channel stretching from the Hoggar Mountains in southern Algeria across the heart of the Sahara, and down to the coast of Mauritania, where it emptied into what is now the Atlantic Ocean.
If it flowed today, it would rival the Niger, or even to Nile. Its basin covered over 1 million square kilometers, and during wet periods it might have carried as much water as the Mississippi.
But it also had a vast and intricate hydrological network. This wasn't a patchwork of isolated lakes,
but a connected system of life where fish, crocodiles, and early humans could have traveled. For hundreds of kilometers along water routes, it stitched the landscape together, making migration, trade, and communication possible, long before cities or written records. Imagining those rivers flowing again is like seeing an alternate version of Earth. One that existed in the same space as ours, but in another time. The banks of the Tamanrasset would have been lush with vegetation, home to reeds and papyrus, fig trees and willows.
Where animals gathered, people followed. Archaeological sites near the Tamanrasset's ancient basin contain stone tools and artifacts dated to around 10,000 years ago.
They belong to cultures that flourished during the last African humid period when the Sahara's rains returned. After the last ice age, these tools are not primitive leftovers. They're carefully crafted points, scrapers, and blades that reveal intelligence and precision.
Whoever made them was skilled not just at surviving, but at thriving in a landscape that provided everything they needed.
Further east, beneath the sands of Libya and Egypt, lies the trace of another forgotten river system, known as the Kufra River. Satellite radar mapping has revealed channels and deltas buried beneath the dunes of the eastern Sahara,
showing that this river once flowed north toward the Mediterranean. It connected a series of ancient basins
that now form the Kufra and Tibesti regions. In its time, it would have been a highway of fertility, leading large wetlands where animals grazed and humans settled seasonally. The remains of fossilized riverbanks still contain deposits of clays and silts, unmistakable signs of long-standing water.
Some of these buried channels have even been linked to underground aquifers that still store water
from those ancient rivers. The Nubian sandstone aquifer system, for example,
which stretches beneath Egypt, Libya, Chad, and Sudan, is one of the largest reserves of fossil water in the world. It's the trapped memory of those vanished rivers, a hidden sea locked beneath the desert floor.
Wells drilled into it bring up water that fell as rain thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years ago.
This buried network tells us that the Sahara wasn't an isolated desert, but once part of a vast, connected world. Rivers link the interior of Africa to the coasts, creating corridors of life that may have guided early human migration.
When Homo sapiens began spreading out of Africa, roughly 100,000 years ago,
these rivers might have served as routes northward. Rather than crossing endless dunes,
Our ancestors may have walked along flowing water, resting in the shade, following the sound of birds and frogs,
the sounds of home. One of the most revealing pieces of evidence for these ancient waterways
comes not from the surface, but from space. Using satellite radar systems like NASA's Shuttle Radar Topography mission.
Look at this anomaly right here.
the depth correlates level. It's clearly artificial.
Radar waves bounce differently off compact rock, moist sediment, or dry dunes,
revealing ghostly outlines that can't be seen by the naked eye.
It's like holding up an X-ray to the planet and watching its bones appear.
These images have exposed vast branching networks, old river deltas, braided channels.
Among them are the unmistakable traces of lakes once fed by these rivers.
The most famous of these ancient bodies of water is Lake Megachad,
which once occupied much of what is now Chad, Niger, and Nigeria. At its greatest extent, it covered nearly 400,000 square kilometers, an inland sea, larger than all the Great Lakes of North America combined. Its shores would have been lined with fishers and herders. It left behind the much smaller Lake Chad we know today, a fraction of its former self.
hearths, pottery, and tools buried in layers of silt. The existence of such lakes and rivers doesn't just tell us about the Sahara's past. It also provides clues about its role in human history.
For decades, archaeologists assumed that the earliest centers of civilization developed independently along great rivers.
The Nile, the Tigris, and Euphrates, the Indus. But the buried rivers of the Sahara challenge that assumption. If there were once extensive river systems running through North Africa, then it's possible that human communities in these regions developed complex cultures earlier than we've recognized.
The evidence of structured settlements, astronomical knowledge, and animal domestication at places like Nabta Playa supports that idea.
Civilization might not have sprung fully formed from the Nile Valley. It may have drifted there on the last tides of the Sahara's rivers. And yet, the sands remain mostly unexplored. Political instability, extreme conditions, and
make archaeological work difficult. Much of what we know comes from remote sensing rather than excavation. Are mapping new sections of these hidden rivers each year. They found that even in areas once considered lifeless, traces of ancient habitation persist. Hearths, grinding stones, fragments of pottery embedded in dry riverbeds.
These are the fingerprints of a people who lived by the water's edge long after it began to fade.
What's striking is how recently some of these rivers might have flowed. Sediment analysis suggests that water was present
in parts of the Central Sahara as recently as 5,000 years ago, a blink of an eye in geological terms.
Some valleys still channel seasonal runoff during rare rainstorms. Their dry beds briefly transformed into torrents
before evaporating again. To stand in one of these wadis during a sudden ray
is to glimpse for a moment the ancient Sahara reawakening. There's something almost paradoxical about it.
The idea that beneath one of the driest places on Earth lies evidence of water everywhere.
The Sahara, for all its silence, is not dead. It's sleeping, layered with memory.
Its sands are like pages of a book, written over and over by climate, by wind, by time.
Each dune might have been a riverbank once. Each grain of sand, a fragment of stone washed smooth by water that hasn't flowed for 10,000 years. In the central and northern Sahara, pieces of smaller tributaries connect to the larger buried rivers. These once fed into basins that supported communities
of early humans and animals. The patterns are so consistent that scientists can reconstruct entire hydrological networks from them.
When they overlay these maps with archaeological findings, a picture emerges. People lived by the water, followed it when it moved, and left behind their stories in tools and carvings
that now rest beneath sand. Some researchers believe that these rivers also played a role in shaping weather patterns.
When the Sahara was green, its moisture and vegetation would have created regional climates that encouraged further rainfall.
It's a feedback loop of life. The rivers fed the air fed the rain, and the cycle sustained itself for millennia. Once that balance tipped and the rivers dried, the process reversed. Dust replaced moisture, reflecting sunlight, cooling the surface and pushing the monsoon southward. The desert expanded, and with it the memory of rivers faded into myth.
But the traces are still there, more than geological curiosities. In the stories of local peoples,
in fragments of ancient folklore, echoes of those rivers survive. Nomadic tribes who roam the Sahara today
sometimes speak of ancestral lands where grass grew high and lakes stretched as far as the eye could see. In Tuareg and Berber oral histories, there are references to old valleys, wells, and springs that have long vanished. Generation after generation, they preserve the memory of flowing water in a land that has forgotten it.
When scientists compare those stories with satellite data, the alignments are astonishing.
The places described in legend often match real buried river systems, as if memory has lasted where water could not.
It's one of the most haunting reminders that history isn't only written in books or carved in stone. Sometimes it's whispered in the stories people tell when they gather around a fire at night.
Are the same stars that once reflected in ancient streams. In recent years, the exploration of these hidden rivers has gained new urgency. As climate change accelerates, understanding the Sahara's past may help us predict its future.
If the desert has turned green before, perhaps it could again.
And restoration projects, small parts of the Sahara could one day bloom artificially, echoing its ancient cycles. The idea might sound ambitious, but it's rooted in the same evidence that first revealed the Tamanrasset.
Beneath the sand, water still lingers. In a way, the Sahara's lost rivers are more than geological features.
They're reminders of impermanence. The planet changes often beyond what we can imagine.
Yet, traces of its former selves remain, waiting to be seen again.
The rivers may no longer flow, but they left behind maps of possibility.
True that even the harshest landscapes can be reborn. If the desert hides the story of water,
then it also hides the story of a life's persistence. Every dry channel once carried movement, trade, and migration.
We rise from the dust, the echoes of the past.
The rivers may have vanished, but the civilizations they nourished might still lie waiting beneath their beds. And so as the wind continues to sweep across the dunes, sculpting them into waves and ridges,
the memory of those ancient rivers hums quietly beneath the surface. If we listen closely to the sand, the wind, the data, we might still hear the faint echo of flowing water.
Ahead lies another question. If rivers once cradled life across the Sahara, where are the traces of those who followed them? What footprints remain of the people who lived by their banks, fished their depths, and crossed their waters long before the desert arrived?
Somewhere beneath the sand, their world is still there, waiting to be uncovered, grain by grain.
When the winds die down across the Sahara, sometimes the sand gives up a secret. Not all at once, not loudly, but slowly, as if the desert itself exhales. What emerges might be a shard of pottery, a fragment of bone, or a series of indentations shaped like footprints pressed into hardened mud thousands of years ago. They don't look like much at first. A few depressions in the dust scattered across a barren landscape. Traces of lives once lived along the forgotten shores of the Sahara's vanished lakes.
The same dryness that makes the desert harsh also makes it protective.
Without water to wash them away, ancient imprints can endure, suspended between erosion and preservation.
In recent decades, scientists have found footprints scattered across what used to be river banks and lake beds. Silent evidence that people once walked there when the Sahara was not sand, but soil.
One of the most remarkable discoveries came in what's now northern Niger, near the site of Gobero.
But beneath the surface, it hides an ancient lake shore that was once alive with human activity.
Around 10,000 years ago, the region held a freshwater lake surrounded by grasslands and trees.
People camped along its edges, hunted nearby, and buried their dead in shallow graves overlooking the water.
When the lake finally dried up, it sealed their world beneath layers of sand,
preserving it with almost impossible tenderness. Archaeologists uncovered dozens of burials there,
along with pottery, stone tools, and the fossilized remains of fish and crocodiles. Skeletons told a story not of hardship, but of community. Some were found in groups, carefully arranged,
as if placed with intention. One of the most famous burials is that of a woman and 2 children.
Flowers had been laid with them. Even after 10,000 years, the gesture feels human in the most familiar sense. That flowers had been laid with them. Even after 10,000 years, the gesture feels human in the most familiar sense. Love expressed in the face of loss. The people of Gobero belong to 2 distinct cultures, separated by centuries.
The first, known as the Kifian, lived there when the Sahara was lush and the lake full. They were tall, strong hunter-fishers who relied on the rich waters around them. When the climate dried for a few thousand years, the lake disappeared, and so did the Kifian. Perhaps pastoralists who herded cattle and goats. Their presence shows how the Sahara's rhythm
Shaped not just the landscape, but entire societies. The same spot could host life, lose it, and then host it again.
like a door opening and closing with each change in climate. Gobero isn't the only place
where ancient footprints and shorelines have resurfaced. Across the desert, from Mauritania to Sudan, each discovery challenges the stereotype of the Sahara as a place of emptiness.
Fishing tools lying where they were dropped. In southern Libya, near the Tadrart Akakas Mountains,
the ancient lakes that once dotted its surface served as magnets for life,
drawing in animals and people from across the continent. Shorelines, after all, are where stories converge. They're places of arrival and departure, of sustenance and exchange.
Along the edges of those vanished waters, people hunted, fished, traded, and told stories about the rains
that came and went. One of the key ways scientists trace those ancient shorelines is through satellite imagery.
From space, the Sahara's surface holds subtle clues invisible from the ground. Long curving ridges of sediment mark where waves once lapped. The patterns of salt flats, or sebkas, trace the outlines of evaporated lakes. In the eastern Sahara, near the border of Chad and Sudan,
the Wadi Hawar stands out as a great dry river valley that once connected the central Sahara to the Nile.
It's thought to have been a corridor of life, linking ecosystems and human populations for thousands of years.
Archaeological surveys along the wadi have found stone tools, animal bones, and hearths dating back to the last humid period. When the river finally dried up, it cut off the Sahara from the Nile.
That isolation may explain one of the most intriguing puzzles in prehistory: why civilizations seem to arise independently
in different parts of the world around the same time. If the Sahara once supported early cultures,